What is up, Asymmetry? How y'all doing? Oh my goodness, got a good one for you today. I had the opportunity to sit down with Meghan Midgley, who is the senior director of the Morton Arboretum's Center for Tree Science. And Megan is a scientist that is a leader in the soil ecology research group at this institution that is working to research and assess trees' ability to adapt to climate change and all of the factors that contribute to that. We went from roots to soil biology to tree species and their behaviors and everywhere in between. It is a deep science dive of the most interesting and profound level. I learned a lot. Megan went super deep. This is plant geekery at its highest level. I was so incredibly honored that she would join us and just give us some of this tremendous insight that we continue to dig for in our quest to understand the natural world and how the changes in the natural world are continuing to impact the organisms we all love so much, the trees in these environments and landscapes that capture our hearts, our minds, and our attention. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Meghan Midgley, everybody. It's super nice to meet you. I've been so excited to get to talk to you about what you do because it is very much in uh so it's very related to what we do here, which although, we grow bonsai trees as like our sort of method of having a people into the world, it actually has connected us to the macro tree
Yeah.
universe pretty directly. And so I know you're working at the Morton Arboretum in a really significant capacity. What exactly are you doing? What do you guys do there?
Yeah. So we are a tree focused public garden, and part of our garden has a big science and conservation mission. So we have the Center for Tree Science, and I am the senior director of the center. We also have the Global Tree Conservation Program, and we have the Chicago Region Trees Initiative. So essentially, as the director of the center, I help focus our team on different projects or different themes of research that can ultimately get disseminated out to these practitioner communities, either in Chicago or internationally.
Very, very cool. Now, somewhere in your bio on the Morton Arboretum website, I read that you're also very involved with the soil systems and like the soil ecology component of things. And I was like really captivated by that. What are you doing with the soil? What's going on there?
Oh, soil. Yeah, I'm trained as a ecologist and a soil ecologist in particular. And I've been working in that world for uh, probably about 15 years. So I've been at the Arboretum for 10 years. And before that, I received a PhD in ecology from Indiana University. Um, and a lot is going on in the soil. I first got excited about it because it responds really quickly to what humans do to it. So we think of soil as being something that takes a really long time to become soil, and so it's very precious and we shouldn't mess with it too much, and that is all very true, but it can also be an important harbinger of things to come.
Hmm.
So I started out in my PhD work being really interested in how trees would respond to different environmental stressors, but I wanted to graduate someday. And that's when I got excited about soil because I was like, okay, I can add this nitrogen to the forest. I may or may not see something happen to the trees within this time period, but I can observe what happens to the soil. And through that, I can predict how the trees will ultimately respond.
Interesting. Yeah, I specifically read about nitrogen and nitrogen in the macro system of the forest. Tell me about this because I we have our own relationship with nitrogen. It's a very finicky relationship. But it's
Yeah.
such a necessary element. It's been a game changer on a global scale for food production and everything else, right? But like what happens when you add nitrogen to the macro system?
So it depends, which is my favorite answer and also the most obnoxious answer. It's why I'm an ecologist. I think it depends is like really fun because then I want to think about what it depends upon. Um, Essentially, it depends on how nitrogen is already cycling in that soil. So there might be some systems where there's not a lot of inorganic nitrogen, which is ammonium or nitrate. It's not attached to any carbon compounds. So oftentimes when we're thinking about fertilizer, we're thinking about ammonium and nitrate as being important elements of the fertilizer. So some forests naturally have a lot of that inorganic nitrogen in them, and then some don't. So some have most of their nitrogen locked up in organic materials like leaves or roots or the bodies of fungi and bacteria.
Mm.
So how that forest responds to an addition of nitrogen depends on what it already looks like in that soil. So if it already has a lot of inorganic nitrogen, what I found is that it essentially like cycles it right on out. So not all of that much happens to that forest when more nitrogen is added to it. But when you have a forest that's operating in a completely different, what we call nutrient economy, and then you add this inorganic nitrogen, it completely changes how that ecosystem is functioning. So it kind of throws it off, and we don't really know how long it'll take or if that ecosystem can recover after that inorganic nitrogen is added for a long time.
Okay, so we're saying inorganic nitrogen as ammonium or nitrate, right? That you're adding, and the
Right.
organic form of nitrogen locked up in leaves, roots, fungi, and bacteria. What is that form of nitrogen that's organic? Like, what does that look like?
So that would be like proteins or some DNA has nitrogen
Mm-hmm.
locked up in it.
Okay.
Chitin is something that we think a lot about. So chitin is what makes up the exoskeletons of insects.
Right.
And it's also a really important compound in fungi. So those are different forms of nitrogen that we might say are organic forms of nitrogen. And I know I just like went way over like the deep end with
Good.
my love of
Dive.
the nitrogen
Dive.
cycle.
Go. Hunt for Red October.
So
Let's go.
it's my number one favorite cycle. So I get kind of excited
Oh,
talking about it.
yeah.
I don't know if everybody gets so excited about the nitrogen cycle.
Yes.
Um,
You found somebody who is very excited. So I've been, just to give you a little bit of background, like bonsai fertilizers historically are animal byproduct derived nitrogen sources, which means they typically come with a lot of garbage, right? They've got a lot of salts, they've got a lot of metals, they've got a lot of very fluid, water soluble things that hitch a ride with the nitrogen or a byproduct of the nitrogen resource, right? And what we I've been working with a lab called Apical Ag Solutions down in Canby, and they use a centripetal force mechanism to pull the sap out of leaf matter, living leaf matter, so they don't dry it and crush it. They pull out the liquid, and then they can give you a nutrient panel of what your tree actually has inside of it in terms of all of the macro and micronutrients. And like nitrogen has been this horrifically complex thing to find like a sustainable source of nitrogen that doesn't fill the plant with a whole bunch of garbage, which through the use of like really clean nutrient components, the thought of the gentleman who created this whole process, his name is David Naus. Basically, if you can give the plant really pure forms of nutrition, you can avoid the toxicities and deficiencies that lead to disease and insect susceptibility. And through this regenerative agronomical approach, we've actually seen it work very well for our trees in terms of their health, but also we've been on a non-chemical sort of maintenance process for almost 5 years without chemicals based on balancing the nutrition inside of the plant. But the tricky devil is always the nitrogen, right? And so this past summer we had a soy protein-based nitrogen that when we hit the peak of summer, we saw our salts increase, trying to keep up with the nitrogen demands that the tree had in this very aggregate soil situation of the bonsai container, which has a limited gravity column, and therefore we can't have a lot of organic matter. And it was like this major bridge that I was able to cross of realizing, wow, this whole thing, I already knew it was complex, but then I was like, well, now this is really complex. And he and I got into this conversation of really the only sustainable form of nitrogen is just N2, straight up nitrogen that's fixed by nitrogen fixing bacteria, or if you can capture
Mhm.
that and you can create a site in the soil to hold into fixing organisms, then that would be like the Shangri-La of containerized cultivation in plants, because you can get clean calcium and phosphorus and all of the other components pretty easily, right? But getting clean nitrogen is really, really tough. So then when I read that you were adding nitrogen to these systems, I mean, like in college, I was so inundated with this notion of the carbon nitrogen balance and how delicate this is, and how throwing off the carbon nitrogen balance has really led to a lot of the problems that we see in really heavily farmed soil systems across North America and probably on a global level. And so I was hopeful you would go deep in this dive of nitrogen, because when you're adding this to a system that does have a lot of organic nitrogen, it cycles it through, or doesn't have a lot of organic nitrogen, it's
When
like
it does.
when it does, it
So
just sort of
when it's
cycles it through.
already dealing with it, the its microbes are primed to deal with it already.
Right.
So
Okay.
essentially, when we were adding ammonium and nitrate, there were a lot of nitrifying bacteria, and those bacteria convert the ammonium into nitrate. And nitrate pretty quickly either leaches out of the soil or gets converted into nitrogen gas.
Mm.
So it can leave that system pretty quickly. So we found that we didn't see a buildup of this inorganic nitrogen that we added. It's probably, I mean, it's still not great because now it's going like downstream,
Yeah.
to rivers, but it's not building up in that soil and impacting those trees. Whereas when the microbes in the trees aren't used to dealing with that input of inorganic nitrogen, they're like, oh, I guess our whole deal is changing now. Like, let's change our microbial. Like, I know these things can't actually think through this process like this, but okay, we're going to totally shift the microbes that we have in the soil. Maybe the trees that are living here aren't going to be as benefited by these microbes, or maybe other trees will be more competitive in this situation. So it can just totally shift the way the forest functions, and perhaps the composition of that forest if it has that input of nitrogen for long enough.
Yeah, and you're saying the composition of the forest, we're talking about a decades kind of shift, or would you see a rapid decline and a rapid replacement of plants that are adapted to handling that kind of nitrogen content?
It probably just depends on the type of plants we're looking at. So like the microbes will change the fastest because their turnover time is the quickest. And then maybe you'll see a shift in the annual plant community and then the perennial herbaceous plant community. It's going to take a little bit longer for that forest to shift in composition, but my hypothesis would be that you would start to see that forest shift
Mm-hmm.
in composition over decades.
Now,
Yeah.
what would be an example of a forest that would be adapted to high organic nitrogen concentration, that could just sort of process this inorganic nitrogen and not really skip a beat? Like, what kind of tree species are adapted to do that?
Maples do really well. So at least in the forest that I've worked in, there are a lot of sugar maples and red maples, and they're they love nitrogen. They cycle nitrogen quickly already. So they're really facilitating this fast nitrogen cycle. We also saw it with cherry trees, tulip poplar trees. So I did all of this research in southern Indiana, so this central hardwood forest. Um, and we were trying to break it down not just by tree species, but types of trees. So a lot of, I'm going to like go in another direction, but a lot of times we
Go.
think about evergreen trees and deciduous trees. or maybe gymnosperms and angiosperms. And we say like, okay, well, clearly like a pine tree is different from an oak tree. So we can break trees into these groups, and if we can understand how these different types of trees function, maybe we can predict this across landscapes. So we've been breaking trees down into these groups based on leaves and their leaf habits for a really long time. With the beginning of my dissertation research, my PhD advisor and I were thinking about below ground traits. So maybe there are aspects of the roots that would also be important and would be a good way for us to break trees into different groups. And the two groups we were looking at were trees that associate with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which infect the inside of roots, or ectomycorrhizal fungi, which form a sheath around the root. And for the most part, trees either associate with one or the other.
Hmm.
So we found that these arbuscular mycorrhizal associated trees, or AM trees, had these fast nitrogen cycles, so lots of inorganic nitrogen. And so all the trees I listed, maples, tulip poplars, cherries, there are many others, but all of those are arbuscular mycorrhizal trees.
Now, is
And then there
not to
are
interrupt you.
ectomycorrhizal trees.
When you say arbuscular, is that, I mean, indo and ecto kind of like
Mhm.
is how I've generally
Exactly.
understood it. So arbuscular is the indo form.
Yes.
Okay, okay, cool. All right. I wasn't sure if then indo was something different or if indo changed to arbuscular because like the taxonomical community is always adapting
Yeah,
faster than.
arbuscular, I think, is just a subset of endo, but they're pretty synonymous.
Okay. Okay. I've got so many questions to ask you. Anyways, please, I'm so sorry to have interrupted.
Okay. And then we have like ectomycorrhizal trees. And so for us, those were beech trees and oak trees and hickory trees. And
Cool.
so I found that those had organic nitrogen cycles. And then the AM trees had the inorganic nitrogen cycles. So when we added a lot more inorganic nitrogen to these forests, those were the two types of trees that were processing it in really different ways, or the two types of forests that were processing it in really different ways.
Okay. And what did you find with the pines? Did you have you done this with the pines and the coniferous component?
So, no. So in southern Indiana, we just had deciduous trees. At the Morton Arboretum, we have all of these different types of trees from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been studying how um, evergreen versus deciduous and ecto versus arbuscular or endomycorrhizal trees are impacting the soil. So we've been splitting them into 4 groups instead of just 2 groups.
Mm.
And we've seen that we find similar patterns as we found in just our deciduous trees in southern Indiana, regardless of what type of, whether it's a deciduous or an evergreen tree.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like these below ground traits are important, but in this context, we haven't added nitrogen to see then how these different forests will respond to it. We've only looked at how these different trees are creating different environments for themselves.
Yeah, interesting. So, is there like a list of like this species is arbuscular mycorrhizal species and this species is ectomycorrhizal species? Does that exist?
Yes. Yep.
Where does somebody find that? I would be so curious.
Oh,
That's so crazy.
yeah. I mean, I can definitely like send you a link to put on your podcast
Please.
link.
People are going to love this. They're going to be like, I want to know.
Yeah, and it gets revised, I would say, like every decade or so, because somebody says, but did you really look at this? And like, what
Right.
about this? But there was an updated list, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, that was a global survey of all of these trees and categorizing them into these groups and saying how colonized they really get.
Mm-hmm.
So how dependent on these fungi they are, depending on which group they're in.
And so is the motivation for this research to be considering how you could boost the durability of these different plant ecosystems in the changing environment? Is it to test what the changing environment could potentially create susceptibility wise? Like, does the changing environment raise or lower nitrogen levels that these trees are going to have to confront? Like, what is the motivation for this whole
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah. So I think ultimately it's can we predict how trees will be responding to global changes? And can we, as I've moved to the Arboretum, can we better manage our local landscapes in ways that will maximize the health of these different types of trees?
Mm-hmm.
So when I was thinking about the nitrogen addition work, that was really focused on the global change issue of nitrogen deposition.
Ooh,
So
explain
we've
that. What's going on there? I don't know
Yeah.
about this.
So I call it like the redheaded stepchild of climate change. So we all know that like there's more carbon dioxide in the air and it's leading to different weather patterns and climate patterns. So we see that there's like, okay, we've got a lot more carbon in our atmosphere than we used to. At the same time, we have a lot more nitrogen in our atmosphere than we used to. And not in that form of N2 like you were talking about, but in these polluting forms.
Okay.
So when we burn fossil fuels and when we have intensive agriculture, we're creating a lot more inorganic nitrogen that ultimately ends up in the air. And then it
Right.
can be deposited onto forests either because it gets heavy and kind of falls on the forest, or it rains and it gets deposited on the forest out of the atmosphere that way. So we see that forests that are really close to large animal husbandry operations or right next to a coal-fired power plant have just a ton of nitrogen that's being input into those forests. So I wanted to understand how that phenomena was influencing the forests, in part because the climate change world is pretty crowded. Like there's a lot of
Right.
great research that's happening over there. And I wanted to understand how this other, like similarly global phenomena was also impacting the forest.
Unbelievable. That's crazy. Nobody ever, well, I mean, maybe people are talking about it, but like that's not something that is commonly discussed amongst just average people walking around minding their business. I mean, even if you're aware of trees, it's like the complexity of all of this stuff is goes so deep that like when you immediately went off the edge, I was just like, yes, I'm gonna learn something today that's gonna like definitely roll around in my marble for a little bit. And like one of the things I was looking at was the rapid loss of availability of phosphorus. Like to the degree that
Yeah,
they're predicting within 50 to 100 years we're not going to have phosphorus, and like 99.5% of phosphorus goes towards plant cultivation or general plant fertilization. And they're like,
mm-hmm.
yeah, turns out we're almost out of phosphorus, and when we are, nobody really knows how plants are going to be fertilized to grow. And I was like,
Right.
this
We can't
seems
make
like,
it
what's that?
because we can't make it.
Yeah,
Like we can make more nitrogen if we have enough energy, but we can't make more phosphorus.
right. So is that something being discussed? Are people talking? Is there a community of people that are freaking out and losing their minds about that right now? Because I would that sounds like a big deal to me.
I am sure there is, and for better or worse, I haven't been part of that community.
Right. It's probably more peace of mind to not get involved.
I'll worry about one thing at a time. But I think what you're getting at with all of this is like one of my favorite topics, which is stoichiometry. It's like the balance of all of these things.
Right.
So, when I'm thinking about how forests are going to respond to any perturbation, I'm thinking about the balance of all of these elements and how that is going to feed into the tree. And is that balance of elements reflected in the tree? Or how can we make those match a bit better?
Hmm.
And then beyond elements, we're thinking about compounds. Because, like you were saying, it's not just do you have nitrogen or not, it's do you have the right form of nitrogen? So when you're applying these this animal waste, it's like, okay, well, maybe you have the right form of nitrogen, but you also have way too much sodium.
Hmm.
And that's what's really screwing everything up. It's not that you're not adding nitrogen or you're adding too much nitrogen. It's that it's not balanced with the rest of your system.
Right.
And I imagine like in a little bonsai system, that balance has to be so difficult to achieve
Yeah.
because you have a small space and a small tree and you're just like tinkering with tiny things and seeing if it works.
Totally. Totally. Well, and here's the other thing is it's like unless you have a PhD in nutrition, so plant nutrition, it's really hard to understand. Like somebody goes to the store and or goes to Amazon or makes their own fertilizer patties out of like bone meal, blood meal, and cottonseed meal, and they put it on their tree, and the tree is green and it grows, and they're like, okay, this is great. I'll put more on, and then it's like you put more on, and it keeps growing. And you put more on, and then one day you put more on, and it starts to turn a little bit yellow, or suddenly you have a lot of insects or a lot of disease, and like I don't think anybody really, at least I can say, until I started really experimenting with this stuff, I had no idea how complex the whole system was. It's almost so complex that it has at times taken the fun out of growing bonsai trees because it's like, oh, I can really screw things up now. Like when I'm playing with
Yeah.
individual things, like there's like, and it's interesting to hear what you're saying about like can the addition of inorganic forms of nitrogen be beneficial to the balance within the tree that allows it to operate at a more optimal level in these changing environments, or can it really screw that whole thing up? And like I'm sure both are true depending on the tree you're working with or the environment that that particular said species is growing in. But the just downright dogged complexity of it is really intimidating. And when I see people doing really brilliant science like you're working on here, it's like in a lifetime the number of those significant questions that you can answer is very limited because the degree of different variables that enter that question is so expansive it's almost infinite when you're out in a larger scale environment that alone starts to create experiment on experiment, hypothesis on hypothesis that has to be vetted, tested over the course of time, and then sound science has to be derived from. It's like really intimidating for me working in this microcosm to like think about that macro level of science and what you're doing. It's like, whoa, super intimidating. But
I think, well, maybe that's kind of what makes it fun for me.
really,
I guess I'm okay with knowing that not all questions will be answered or not
that's
all questions will be answered by me. And it also is a good motivation to make some science friends because,
right.
if you're like, no man is an island, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to figure it all out by yourself. And I think maybe 10 years ago when I was starting as a research scientist with my own lab, I wanted to answer all the questions. I wanted to be the first one to get there. And now if I meet somebody and they say, "Oh, I want to work on this thing," I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I've got some data for you.
Cool.
Please like work on this. That's such a great question. We need more people to be answering and asking these questions."
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that it just kind of feeds this ecosystem of curiosity and excitement. And I think that's what works for me as a scientist. I think it's also why I'm not a businesswoman because
Mm.
I would never be able to create a product because I would always say like, well, what if it doesn't work in X, Y, or Z situation? Or, well, that's a rule of thumb, but it's not always true.
Right.
And so that's what you have to run into, and you still have to make decisions about how you're going to deal with your plants and live your life. Like you just have to make decisions at some point. They're imperfect
Right.
decisions. And as long as you keep making observations along the way, it'll get better.
Interesting. Interesting. You're accepting less than perfection. You're just sort of you're okay with that.
I mean, I'm not okay with it, but I have to be,
Right.
you
Right.
know?
Right. That's the
Like,
the practicality of it, right?
right. It's this like analysis paralysis thing. And,
Yeah.
I'm not probably going to be the person that is going to be, leading the charge to make a specific change, but somebody has to do it with the imperfect information that we're always going to have.
Yeah, but you're supplying information that allows them to make an educated decision about a change. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I remember like starting to garden when I was in grad school, and despite the fact that I'm a plant expert and a soil scientist, I felt totally intimidated. I was like, I'm going to need to add, okay, first I'm going to need to put down some cardboard, and then maybe I'm going to use some landscape fabric, and then I'm going to buy all this fertilizer and all this junk. And I was like, I'm not even thinking about how this works.
Right.
I'm just trying to follow all of these different books that I was reading and trying to
Mm.
garden that way. And so maybe that's kind of the take home point. Like take a step back and think about what you're actually trying to do before you start pruning or adding different elements or repotting. Like, why are you doing this? Like
Hmm.
there's there are steps, there are manuals, there are experts in how to do these things, but you also have to look at the situation you're in and try to make an informed decision.
Right. 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 Which is which is challenging without a lot of knowledge. I wanted to ask you about the mycorrhiza again though, because we talked with this microbiologist Karen O'Hanlon from Ireland, and she has been working on this bacterial inoculation that she uses, has developed these products for in agriculture, and people have been using them really with a lot of success in the UK, that um, go out and basically in the soil find available forms of iron and then bring it back to the tree and deposit it in the tree. And she started doing this research of how this all works. And it was an endoform of bacteria that would come into the tree, and then the tree would have this like stress response. And then the bacteria would like provide this soothing salve to the tree to be like, I'm friend, not foe. And like, then the tree would say, oh, thank you for the iron. I'm going to give you some resources and we'll continue this symbiotic relationship, right? But she said something about mycorrhiza, because her whole like study is more around bacteria, because she said, you know, mycorrhiza and the species of fungi that engage in mycorrhiza with a tree's root is present on the seed coat at germination, and is largely the only species of fungi, whether that's singular or plural, the only species of fungi that that tree's roots can engage with in the mycorrhizal relationship, whatever is on the seed coat. And I thought that was really interesting. I've never heard that before, and I see a lot of people inoculate their soils with mycorrhizal fungi to try and encourage these relationships. But now you're talking about arbuscle and ectomycorrhizal relationships with these trees. Do you know anything about that? Like mycorrhiza, where that relationship is formed, if it is specific to what was there on the seed coat initially, if there is malleability in the mycorrhizal relationships with fungi and root?
Yeah, usually there's multiple species involved. So I can't really speak to whether they would only be the species on the seed coat or if they might be species that are in the soil already. But I can say I would expect founder effects. So essentially, if you're the first mycorrhiza there,
Hmm.
you're probably going to be the first one to colonize that plant, and you might block other fungi from colonizing that plant. So I could see that being very true for a young plant.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, whoever was closest to you is who you're going to be infected by. But over time, that relationship can change.
Hmm.
And that's where I think trees are a really exciting system to study this in, because the fungi is selecting a partner and the plant is selecting a partner. And it can go from being a mutualistic relationship to a pathogenic relationship, depending on how those two actors are playing over time.
Interesting.
So we often think of, or maybe we often talk about mycorrhiza as always being beneficial. Like,
Right.
okay, well, it's going to colonize the roots and it's going to exchange nutrients for carbon. So the plant gives the fungi carbon, and the fungi can go out into the soil and capture nutrients that the plant can't reach.
Right.
So it's all good all the time. But in different environments, in different contexts, those same species of fungi can go from being friends to foe. So the plant is still pumping carbon to them, and the fungi maybe isn't actually giving them any nutrients back.
Oh.
So they're like, oh, JK, I don't want to be your pal
Right,
anymore,
right. I
but
take it
it's going to
back.
take you a while to figure it out. And so it could lead to that plant, just having this negative relationship for a while. Maybe that plant is able to sever it, and then other mycorrhizae are able to colonize, or it could lead to the death of that plant
Wow.
over time. And that's where it kind of comes back to the nutrients in the soil.
Mhm.
So there's some really cool studies out of Sweden. They do amazing plant fungal research, and they were able to show that when there's higher amounts of nitrogen in the soil, that the fungi happily exchanges nitrogen for carbon. So
Okay.
there's plenty of nitrogen around, and that fungi is like, sure, you get 30 nitrogens, I get 30 carbons. That's our exchange rate.
Hmm.
But if there's low nitrogen in the soil, then that fungi can say, you get one nitrogen for every 30 carbons because I need nitrogen too.
Right.
So the exchange rate can depend on that nutrient context in the soil. So it's still beneficial to the tree, but just barely.
Right.
It's like very marginally beneficial in that situation.
In the form of the carbon is in the exudates or the sugar produced through photosynthesis, right? And so these are being deposited in the beneficial, or I shouldn't say beneficial, but the fungi are like, thank you very much, I needed that carbon. But isn't there carbon in the soil that the fungi can like feed on?
Yeah, so our buscular or this endomycorrhizal fungi doesn't seem to be able to go out and scavenge it itself.
Mm.
So it's really dependent on plants to get that carbon. But the ectomycorrhizal fungi is interwoven with the phylogenetic tree of sapotrophic fungi. So sapotrophic fungi are free living, and they are the decomposers in the soil that are
Hmm.
rapidly breaking down uh, nutrients and all of that carbon and leaves, roots, microbe bodies. And then ectomycorrhizal fungi are, for the most part, just exchanging carbon and nitrogen with the plants.
Okay.
But it's a little bit more fluid because those fungi can also break down organic matter and get that organic nitrogen out of that tissue and then
Mm.
exchange that with the plant. So in
Oh.
certain situations, they can be saprotrophs, and in certain situations, they can be beneficial mycorrhizae, and in certain situations, they can be pathogens, really along this spectrum and in this context of resource availability.
Whoa. Whoa. That's crazy.
It is
And
crazy. It's really fun.
yeah, that's amazing. It's also, I was like, when you just said that, like sapotrophic something something, I was like, wow, that is a mouthful to like
I
just
know.
just so seamlessly like wax poetically about. That was really impressive. But like when you're operating, well, how did you get into all of this? I guess like maybe that'll help me understand how, like when did this start, like as a kid in college, like
Hmm.
where did you grow up, how did this all begin?
Yeah, I grew up in Northern California. So I was in the San Francisco Bay Area suburbs. I grew up in Pleasanton, which is not a cool place, but it's the burbs.
Right.
And at the time when my parents moved there and had me, it was like the edge of the suburbs. So there were a lot of open spaces to wander around. And my dad thinks that the reason I got into this is because we would check out butterflies together when I was a little kid.
Nice.
So that's his hypothesis.
Uh-huh.
I don't know about it, but maybe it was pre-consciousness.
Could have been, yeah.
I think I got into it because of Girl Scout backpacking camp.
Nice, well, that makes more
So,
sense, huh?
yeah, sorry, Dad. I used to go up to the Sierra Nevadas during the summer, and it was a graduated backpacking um, graduated backpacking camps. So you went from doing like 1 day kind of pretend backpacking to a 12-day backpacking trip.
Hmm.
And I just loved it. And I loved nature. I wanted other people to be able to experience and love nature. And that's what made me decide, okay, I want some sort of career in protecting this for future generations.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I was like, I don't know what I want to be. I could be a scientist, I could be an environmental lawyer. I don't know how I want to use my brain or what my career might be. I just know I want to be in this space.
Yeah.
And so then I went to UC San Diego for college and got a environmental science degree. So it was pretty broad. I knew I liked plants and animals and kind of the big stuff, but didn't really know what to do from there. And then I went to grad school and I started a project looking at how humans were interacting with trees. So, what causes humans to plant trees or cut trees down? And so I was interviewing people about how they felt about trees. And it was the worst thing I ever did in my life. I
Oh.
absolutely hated it. I was just not, it was not my jam. It was too kind of loosey goosey. And at the same time, I was taking classes in the biology department and having a lot of fun learning about how organisms were all interacting with one another, about restoration, ecology, and at some point, I was talking to an older grad student, and he said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I think I want to be an ecologist when I grow up. And he's like, well, you need to be in the bio department. So thank you, Luke Flory, for pushing me to do that. I got into the biology program, and my PhD advisor started about the same time that I did. So I knew I cared about how humans were influencing ecosystems, but I didn't know how to articulate it or study it until I met Rich. And he was like, yeah, I'm excited about how trees are manipulating their environments, but I really want to understand how all of the things that people are doing are harming forests, are interacting with forests, so that maybe down the line we can create policy that changes what we're doing because our science is saying, okay, well, we shouldn't be doing it this way. And I was like, yes,
Mm.
that's what I want to be when I grow up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bit of meandering, but ultimately I figured out that I wanted to understand how humans were impacting ecosystems. And
Interesting.
then from there, I got into soil. And now at the Arboretum, I'm asking, okay, now that we understand something about how trees are responding to us, are creating different soils for themselves, how can I create better environments for trees in urban areas? So, how can I create different soil blends or manipulate the environment in some way so that we can have higher biodiversity of trees in urban areas?
Mm-hmm.
How can I use what I know to understand how our management practices, like prescribed fire or tree thinning, are altering soil? And how will that feed back into creating the forest communities that we're trying to create?
Mm.
So that's kind of how I'm now using all of this. It's not just understanding these macro level global changes, but things that we as people are actively doing to our environments and able to talk to people who want to improve the environment but aren't really sure how.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say, okay, based on and I probably won't go into like the nitrogen cycle or stoichiometry or mycorrhizal
Right.
fungi for most urban foresters, but I'll say, okay, well, I can tell you what, your tree doesn't like growing in a rock. If you can't put a shovel in it, then the tree is not going to do very well either.
Right.
So let's go ahead and add some mulch, and let's add some compost, and let's try to fluff up this soil so we can create a better physical environment. And after we've done that, maybe we can think about different types of compost or adding biochar or adding some other soil amendment, maybe that will be the best fit for that tree.
Mm-hmm.
And once we get to that, then maybe we can think about putting some of the below ground biology back. Maybe we can think about that bacteria and that mycorrhizal fungi and those saprotrophs so that we can create this mini forest ecosystem for this urban tree.
Wow. Wow. And have you actually executed this on like a broad scale? Like, have you been able to accomplish success with this whole system that you're trying to put in place? Or is this
We
what you're
haven't quite
doing?
gotten there yet. That's
Okay.
what
All
I'm
right.
doing.
In work in
So,
progress.
yeah, yeah. We did a big project with the Illinois Tollway where we added different types of organic matter to the soil and then planted different tree species. And what we're trying to understand now is, well, can we get some of these more sensitive tree species to grow along the tollway if we create better environments for them?
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of just testing out some of these ideas.
Nice. Nice. And how long would a test go for before you felt like you had conclusive information that would alter the practices of how you handle something on a larger scale?
So, a first experiment like that will probably take 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really want to see are similar experiments or lines of evidence coming from other places.
Right.
So I think if you just have one experiment in one location, it's difficult to dangerous to say, like, here's how we should change all of our policies or all of our practices.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see that happen over and over again, then maybe you can say more robustly, like, yes, you should be adding this to these sorts of trees,
Right.
or you should add it in this context, but not in that context.
Right. Right. Do you know who Dr. Elaine Ingham is? Like the soil food web, any of that stuff? Have you ever?
I don't think so.
No, yeah. I mean, what you're talking about with like compost and then soil biology and the trophic levels and whatnot. Um, when I first kind of like got into this notion of, all right, I would like to move away from the chemical process. I actually had like this trickle down experience. I had root aphids on some of my trees. I took my trees down to Oregon State to their pathology lab, and they looked at them and they said, "Oh, this tree shouldn't have this disease. It's typically thought to be resistant. So there must be something happening here." And they like scratched away the soil, and they're like, "Oh, you have root aphids, and the root aphids are, impairing the tree's resistance, and so now that explains why you have this disease." And I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was a thing," right? Like early on in my bonsai cultivation process. And so then I like talked to all of these scientists and all of these labs across the United States, and they're like, "You definitely need to submerge this tree in a bath of orthene, which is an organophosphate, and that's the only way to kill the root aphids." And they like made root aphids this monstrosity of a demon, like this insect ninja that kills plants, right? And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And so I like soaked a bunch of trees in orthene, and it like completely torched the roots, and all of the trees started dying. And then I was like, "Oh my gosh, this this is even worse." The root aphids weren't that bad. Like there were just some like things that I wasn't like psyched on, but they weren't like doing this. And so then I talked with more scientists, and they're like, "Oh, well, you've got to rebuild the biology in the system so the tree can recover." And so then I started like doing this very ramshackle experiment on all of the fertilizers that have these inoculants, right? Like non-plant food based ingredients for the soil and whatnot, and started finding these fertilizers that had these biological inoculants that started improving the health of the tree. And then like from there, I was like, okay, I'm having these symptoms of nutrient problems in my trees because they are dry, arid climate trees that I've brought to the temperate rainforest of the Pacific Northwest. And I really had no like knowledge or information that in bringing a tree from a dry, arid environment, say like the Sierra Nevadas, depending on whether you're on the west slope or the east slope, or the Rocky Mountains, right, between a desert and like the plains, to the Pacific Northwest, that I was going to subject them to a different climactic condition. I knew they were going to get more rain and it was going to be darker during the winter, but I didn't know what that did physiologically with the tree, right? And all of a sudden, like, I started having these problems 3 to 5 years into having a tree here in the Pacific Northwest, and I was like, this continues to happen. I don't know what's happening. And I started thinking, well, biology solved the root aphid issue, so maybe biology will solve this issue. And so I inoculated them with a tremendous amount of biology. And not only did it not solve the issue, it made it catastrophically worse. And so
Hmm.
then I got in this thing of like, okay, well, now I'm too far down the rabbit hole. I don't know anything. I've gone so far that I need to find a solution or else there's no coming back. And that's what sent me on this like regenerative agronomical investigation, because like I studied bonsai in Japan, and like the chemical dependency in Japan for bonsai cultivation was such a crutch. It was like a weekly thing, right? And so they were getting these plants to grow at this abnormal pace with these abnormal proportions inside of this very small space, right? Smaller leaves and smaller twigs to show this like scalability of the plant. But in doing so, the resources that it took to get that unnatural proportion to happen created a lot of susceptibility that had to be managed. So, anyways, like, oh, hey, Miguel, will you turn the heater off for me? Will you turn the heater off for me? Awesome. Thank you. So, anyways, like, long story short, I started realizing through all the testing and like this discovery thing that I was going through just to like simply satisfy my own necessity to have the answer, because nobody could give me the answer. It was really truly like no matter who I talked to, they would be like, well, maybe it's this, or maybe it's this, or maybe it's biology, or maybe it's soil, or maybe it's care practices. And that's what led me to this whole like regenerative agronomical pursuit, which turns out that's a whole nother spider web of knowledge that I'm working on now. But like I started realizing, oh, plants are adapted to tolerate certain conditions. And what I found about of dry arid plants is that they're adapted to tolerate high salts, but they're not adapted to tolerate high metals. And
Hmm.
plants that grow in temperate rainforests are adapted to tolerate high metals, but they're not adapted to tolerate high salts. And so we started like testing these plants out in the wild environment, like coastal redwoods or mountain hemlocks or Douglas firs or Rocky Mountain junipers, ponderosa pines, lodgepole pines, Sierra junipers, you name it. Like we've been bristlecone pines, foxtail, like we've been testing plants all over the country in the wild environment and finding this very consistent character that plants are growing in locations where they can tolerate the worst of the conditions.
Hmm.
Like that really, like people, and in my horticulture degree, that people always said, listen, it's plants don't grow where they want to grow, they grow where they aren't outcompeted by a stronger species, right?
Yeah.
But there was like this is like another layer to that where it's like, well, yeah, not outcompeted and also tolerant of the worst case scenario, because through this testing and through this nitrogen having a lot of salt and seeing which trees were susceptible to that and which trees weren't, it like all made sense. And then the plants that I have problems with unsheltered in the Pacific Northwest inevitably don't have a tolerance to the conditions of the acidity releasing them. So it just became this like fascinating entanglement that explained so much. And it just makes me hungry for more and more knowledge like that, because it actually answers a question for the first time, instead of people being like, maybe try this, maybe you do this, like all that dogmatic
Yeah.
stuff, like you said about gardening. It's like, okay, I'm going to get some cardboard, some weed berry, and some fertilizer. What am I actually doing here? Like, what is actually
Yeah.
going on? And how do I work with that instead? Right.
Right.
But does working at the Arboretum, um, do you find that that is like an incubator for everything that you're doing? Like, are there other people working on other problems, or is there a limited number of people that are working on this kind of science? Like, what's the mission of the Arboretum that empowers you to be doing what you're doing? Because you're working at an Arboretum outside of Chicago, talking about creating this environment along the tollways that is potentially something that can tolerate a little bit more of the rigors of growing there, and maybe that's applicable to other things in this like climactic tolerance and malleability. Like what else are you guys working on
Yeah.
why at the Arboretum? Why there at the Arboretum? Like, how does that all come to pass?
So there are about 30 researchers at the Arboretum.
That's a
We have
lot.
10, it's a lot of
That's
people.
a
We have
lot.
10
Yeah.
individual labs, and we're all focused on different parts of trees and forests. So, broadly speaking, the Arboretum seeks to create a greener, healthier, more beautiful world where people and trees thrive together. So we're looking to make better environments for trees and better environments for people because we think that they need each other.
Hmm.
And as part of that, we do research that can help trees thrive in these different areas. So, broadly speaking, we focus on arboriculture and urban forestry. We focus on restoration and management, mostly of the local oak ecosystems and prairies.
Hmm.
And then we focus on tree biodiversity and conservation science.
Wow.
So those are our three big research themes. And then all of the different people that have different expertise are together trying to solve problems related to those different themes. So, for example, next door, we have a root biologist. Across the hall, we have a tree pathologist. We have an entomologist, forest ecologist, plant systematist, which is basically like understanding how plants are um, phylogenetically or evolutionarily related to one another. And we have a tree conservation biologist, and we have an arboriculture scientist.
Wow.
So, like, all of us together are thinking about either different parts of the tree or different ecosystems that trees might be in. And it's just an amazing environment to work in. So at most universities, you might have a biology department, and every research lab is kind of doing its own thing.
Hmm.
They're all just like different microcosms of their field, and they probably collaborate with lots of other people at different universities. But there are often aren't a ton of cross lab collaborations happening at universities. Whereas here, not only are we all working on the same type of organism, we're all working on trees, but we're also working towards this broader mission of ensuring trees are healthy and thriving in our changing environments.
Nice. Yeah, very cool.
So we just have a lot of, I don't know, it's like I've told everybody they're not allowed to leave. I mean,
You're
I'm like,
right.
this is such a great team. Everybody really respects one another a lot. Um, and I've gotten, even though we all work on trees, if we weren't all in the same space at the same organization, we might not be working together
Yeah.
because I would be the soils person, and then we'd have our tree conservation biologist, and this our worlds would never intersect.
Right.
And so here I can talk to our tree conservation biologist and say, oh, well, that's interesting that this tree you're working on is having more pathogen problems in this area than that area. I wonder if there's something to do with the soil. I wonder if there's some elements in the soil that are allowing that tree to resist that pathogen in that area. That would be cool to study together. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I'm like out in left field, but we can have that conversation. And he's then thinking about the environment that tree is growing in a totally different way.
Are you God, now you're speaking my language. Are you finding elements that are increasing resistance of certain trees to certain things? Like, have you actually been able, when you come with that potential what if, have you been able to identify anything where that's like pretty concrete, or at least has a high potential to explain certain susceptibilities or resistance?
We are just at the cusp.
Cool.
So, my colleague is working on butternut. It's a tree that's related to walnuts, and it's been really hit by this canker for decades.
Mm.
And so, there aren't a ton of adult butternuts around. So, he and his team are searching for these butternut trees and trying to understand what's making some of them persist or be more resistant or not. So
Any
we
idea
just had
what
a
it is?
cursory conversation, and I said like, "Oh, it'd be cool to collect some soil." And he said, "Well, what should we measure?" And I said, "Shoot, there's so many things to measure. I don't know." And then like we started thinking about all of the possibilities, all of the things that he could measure that might actually be informative for creating some sort of resistance
Yeah.
in that plant. Like, is it more calcium? Maybe they're tougher.
Hmm.
Maybe there's some sort of antimicrobial compound they can make if they have enough, manganese. Like it, you get a lot into this periodic table of possibilities.
Totally. Totally. It's a nightmare. Yeah, maybe there's a
Yeah,
higher level of
really is.
copper. Maybe there's a higher level of copper. Maybe it's their boron moly ratio. Maybe
Yeah,
it's like
totally.
it starts to spiral out of control and you're just
Yeah,
like, "Oh my gosh." That's
yeah.
that's super fascinating. So, I'm trying to create trees that look like ancient trees. Because bonsai is recreation of nature in miniature, but like bonsai, largely what we know of in the world is sourced from Japan and the trees that we see out of Japan. And I apprenticed in Japan for 6 years and really appreciate and understand that model. But like coming back to the Western United States, I grew up in Colorado and I went to school in California and spent a lot of time in the Sierra Nevadas. And I really wanted to make trees that looked like the landscapes that I knew. And so, like, that meant instead of making a 200-year-old tree or a 500-year-old tree, I was trying to make a tree that looked 5,000 years old, like the bristlecones, or 4,000 years old, like the Sierra junipers. And so, like, in doing that and going to these places, you see the degradation of ancient trees happening rapidly because they're the least malleable, or at least that's what's been explained to me. That they can't change as fast as their offspring can, right, through that genetic differentiation. And one of the areas that I really became fascinated with as I was like traveling and working was the Pulian olives, which are suffering from a very major pathogen, and it's killing them all, right? And they're like 3,000 years old, and these are like human raised trees for 3,000 years, and suddenly they're dying. And so we went to Puglia and tried to figure out like what is happening here, like what's leading to the susceptibility of Xylella, because Xylella has always been around. Why now? Why is it wiping these trees out now? And it is such a needle in a haystack search, is what we found. But like we kind of went through the process of like talking with some of the orchard managers and their practices, and of course they're selling everything as totally organic, but then like as we're walking through the orchards we're finding like bags of ammonium phosphate and like a ton of glyphosate, and it was like, ooh, this is interesting. And then like they've been told by scientists they need to till the surface of the soil to knock down the cover crop because that's what's harboring the insect that's now the psyllids that are infecting through the piercing action the foliar mass with this bacterium that's and so all of a sudden you like start getting into this like forensic discussion of what is this thing's been here for 3,000 years, and in the past like 30 years basically they're all dying. What did
Mhm.
what went wrong? And it almost inevitably leads back to kind of what you're talking about: changing conditions, factory fertilization, forms of ammonium and nitrogen, and all of the garbage that comes with it, and then our like reactivity to that, which is destroying any chance for the tree to like recover. But one thing that you said that I thought was really interesting is you go to school down in San Diego and you're talking with people about their relationship with trees, and you hated it, but like, do you have some form of like theory of why trees are so important to humans and like why we're drawn to them, just like on a almost like DNA
Hmm.
level? Have you ever has there been any have you studied that? Like, is there anything there for you?
I haven't studied it, but I do think it's really important. So it's kind of, I think at, 22, I wasn't intellectually advanced enough to be a social scientist
Hmm.
because, like, really thinking about how our social systems work and the fuzziness of them was too hard for me.
Yeah.
I really wanted more things that were black and white, that were very scientific. very numbers oriented. But as I've developed as a person, I've kind of switched back over, started to think a lot more about why people are doing what they're doing and how science can help us understand all of these things that I get excited about. But that doesn't mean that people are going to adopt those
Yeah,
practices.
sure.
It doesn't mean that people are going to care. And so I say all of this because we've had conversations about how can we get more people to plant trees along their parkways or take care of the trees in front of their homes. And as scientists, we often start talking about, like, well, they store so much carbon, they keep areas cooler. Like, here are all these things that we can measure and say, like, here's why trees are good. But I think that we should plant trees because it makes us feel good.
Yeah.
Like, if you can envision walking down a street that has old trees lining it, and you can think about walking along a street that doesn't have any trees along it, where would you rather be?
Totally.
You know, it doesn't take a lot of numbers or a lot of, yeah, like scientific data to say, like, why should we like trees? We just do. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's somebody who has a way better answer than me,
No,
you know, because it's not my expertise. So I have enough humility to know that, like, there's somebody out there that actually has the answer.
yeah.
But for me, I've decided that that is important, that we enjoy trees so much, and that it's not about all of the quantitative benefits.
Hmm.
It's about those things and just how we're feeling when we're around trees.
Mm-hmm. Do you think everybody feels that?
I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
I know there's some
Me
people that
too.
don't. I mean, like,
Me
I know I
too.
have a friend who bought a house and the first thing he did was like cut down all the trees,
Ah,
you know, because
devastating.
like he didn't want the leaves to be in his yard or whatever.
Yeah.
But most of us don't do that,
Yeah.
you know.
That's a different thing, right? Like, how does that happen? I mean, like you go to New York in Central Park in the morning, like early morning, it's just like thousands of people in this tiny space running and walking and getting their exercise. And it's like they could be running or walking down any street in New York, but they just flock to Central Park, you know? And
Yeah.
it makes sense to me because if we, or assuming we, or however people think, right? Like however related we are to apes, I'm going to say we evolved from apes, right? Like our primal mind, like the tree is home, safety, food and resources, right? So like immediately I read like a American Institute of Psychology or something study like 10 years ago that said like 80 some percent of people's first memory or association of home is with a tree. And
Hmm.
so I started doing this project because I work with kids in the school systems here in the Pacific Northwest on bonsai projects. And I started doing like my introduction with them is I gave them all a sheet of paper and I said, draw a tree. And it was very interesting because like 10 years ago, Portland was like the cool place to be. In like 2010 to pre-pandemic, Portland was one of the it places at like good coffee, good food, good design and art, and it was like awesome, right? And so you had a lot of people from a lot of different places, and the pictures that all of these of trees that all these kids would draw were all different. And then you'd
Hmm.
be like, "Oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Indiana. I'm from Chicago. I'm from New York. I'm from Florida." You know, and like it was so innocent because these are like, you know, first graders, second graders, third graders, but they're drawing the tree that associated with where they were from. And it was like so um, cementing of that, like whatever that figure was, however real that statistic was, I was like able to actually see it. And so then I started being like, wow, we really do kind of identify with trees as like on like a primal level, like a subconscious level. But then I always wonder those people that do then move into that place and say, "Oh, they're dirty and messy," and they cut them down. It's like, well, what happened to that person? You know, like what, what,
Who hurt
where
you?
were they born? What happened? You know, like how was that damaged? Because like, It's so different than, a majority, but it is clearly something that, like, same experience walking through New York. I was walking by like a whole block where they were just mowing down all the trees, and it was like being taken out to add more concrete. And it was like, whew, that was hard. It's hardcore to think about taking out a tree in New York because there's not enough trees, So it's like,
Yeah.
wow, interesting. We were, yeah, we were born maybe in different places. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's probably somewhere along this, at least American spectrum of what a good yard looks like or what a good parkway looks like, where, okay, well, it's the best if it is a weedless lawn. There's some people that have that perception of like that's the ideal yard.
Hmm.
And I can say, just like around my house, I can see all my neighbors doing different things. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, how many leaf blowers can we have going in like succession?
Right.
Because they like the trees, but oh my gosh, we got to get the lawn clean,
Right.
and that is of utmost importance, because otherwise we're not keeping up with the Joneses. So I think
Yeah.
there's some like spectrum there too of how people are conditioned to relate to nature that might be different from how we would innately relate to it without that social structure.
Yeah. 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 That makes sense. That makes sense to me. Well, so I have to ask you this: like, you grew up in, there's a lot of problems with California, right? There's a lot of people there. It's arguably like one of the golden land masses on planet Earth as far as like the natural environment. And to find out that you grew up backpacking in the Sierras, I think the best mountain range in the world. That's my personal opinion. Um, how did you end up in Illinois? That's like such
Yeah,
a far world from the beautiful mountainous coastal godland of California.
I know. Well, I applied to grad school on the East Coast, and I applied to grad school on the West Coast, and then I applied to Indiana University. And on the Wikipedia page for Bloomington, Indiana in 2007, it said it was the California of the Midwest.
Oh, I've been to Bloomington. That's a strong,
Yeah,
strong. Yeah, okay.
so
California, the Midwest. There you go.
yeah, so I visited a few places, and when I visited Bloomington, it was February, so it was snowy. And for a Californian that wasn't used to a lot of snow, I thought that was really cool. Like it
Yeah.
had snowed that day, so I thought it was kind of magical that it had snowed. And because it's a small college town, everybody was super nice.
Mm,
So when I went to some of these schools in bigger cities, um, the professor might be a little more scrutinizing, and it was like more of a sink or swim situation. And I
right.
was definitely in a period where I needed some mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and had all of these great conversations with people and felt like, okay, this is a place where I can grow and get the support that I need to figure out what I want to do. And then I moved to Bloomington, Indiana, and realized like it is small. So, especially if you're a grad student, there's like the three bars that you can go to that aren't
Right.
full of undergrads,
Right.
and your professors are going to the same bars. So, like, you can't be jerks to each other, or you're
Yeah.
kind of like out of the club.
Right.
Everybody's kids are going to the same daycare. So it made it so it was really like a nice academic community to be in. So I was there, and then one of my professors, when I was kind of wrapping up, said, "Hey, have you heard of the Morton Arboretum? I think there's a position at the Morton Arboretum you might like." And I said, "No, I've never heard of the Morton Arboretum." He said, "Well, you should check it out." I checked it out. I applied for the job, and ended up like in the Pleasanton of Chicagoland.
Right. Right.
So I'm back in the burbs.
Uh-huh.
Um, you know, Here I am. It's a little flatter than I would like. I really miss
Right.
topography,
Yeah.
but I have grown to appreciate the prairies and the oak savannas.
Yeah. Yeah, there's magic in every landscape. That's amazing. The journey that you've made, and it sounds to me like the community you're surrounded by in terms of your colleagues is like creme de la creme of
Yeah.
people if you want to be super invested in answering questions about trees. Because I do find like tree people find tree people, and it's like, oh, you're a tree person, I'm a tree person, and it's like, okay, well now we're just friends, right?
Yeah. And there aren't that many tree jerks in the world.
Yeah,
If you
yeah,
find, I'll say like soil people are the best because there's not a lot of people that are excited about soil.
sure,
So you go to a soil conference and everybody's just like, oh my gosh, there's somebody else that's excited about soil. So
yeah,
there are some, groups of tree people that are a little more difficult, but for in general, tree people are pretty great people to be hanging out with.
totally. Um, how influential and obviously like Susan Simard's work has gotten such broad publicity and is like super groundbreaking. How how influential was her research on like the soil biology and the microbial highways and all of that? How influential has that been in your position as a scientist on your field of studying soil tree interaction?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's a lot more influential outside of the scientific community than
Mhm.
inside the scientific community. I think as soil biologists, we're still kind of grappling with and debating the extent to which these highways exist, that these are mutual exchanges. And I think that it has drawn a lot of people that might not have thought about soil biology into this world.
Yeah.
So when I start talking about roots and soil, a lot of times people will reference Susan's work and her book and say like, "Oh my gosh, it's so amazing." And I have to take a beat and not say like, "Well, we're not entirely sure, like if this or that or the other thing is happening." Because I'm like, "Oh, she's done this amazing job of bringing people into this world
Yeah.
that might not have gotten excited about soil biodiversity
Right.
or how trees and soil are interacting." So I have to like check myself and remember like, okay, these are my people. How
Mhm.
can I engage with them and get excited about what they're excited about, and also, start to talk about some of the nuance,
Yeah.
start to think together about how these things actually work and where they might work and where they might not work.
Yeah.
So I find that I don't run into a ton of other soil biologists that are actively studying those networks, but I meet a lot of people that are excited about soil because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you almost need those breakthroughs um where somebody is able to engage the public on that level of like imagination and fantastical association of discovery to create the open door for some people to walk through and really go deep or to draw on a larger population, and it seems like her work really did that. I remember when the book, the body language of no, is it the body language of trees, what was, there's a book that really like anthropomorphizes trees that was super, I mean, people got super psyched. I'm trying to think of the title of it, and I know that a lot of scientists have been like, this is not, no, nope, this is not what's going on. But it's like the number of people that have approached me and been like, have you read that book? I'm so embarrassed I can't remember it, but like, have you read that book? And it's like, yeah, trees are awesome, right?
Uh-huh.
Whether it totally applies. But I was just thinking about you saying like, yeah, tree people are cool, but then you go and you're even with a fewer number of people for soil science, and then and then it naturally kind of led me to think about Susan's work because it really made soil interesting for the first
Mhm.
time for a lot, like a large population of people. And
Yeah.
I would imagine there's a lot of people trying to poke holes into that or looking at it really in depth. But captivated my attention. I really thought it was an
Yeah,
interesting concept, you know?
exactly. Like we don't want to shut down people who are getting excited about something and saying like, and gatekeep.
Mm-hmm.
I think making sure we're not gatekeeping science if somebody doesn't understand all the nuance is really important, because at the end of the day, some of those people are going to become scientists, but a lot of those people are going to be interacting with the natural world and are going to be voting and are going to be making decisions. So we can't be shutting people out when they don't have perfect information.
Yeah. 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 Well said. Yeah, I agree with that. Do you think that there is a high level of creativity in tree science right now? Like I have a hard time understanding it cuz I'm on the creative side of things, so I like to think far and wide, and anytime that I talk with somebody who's like a true blue like scientist, I feel like creativity just gets like smushed. Like not only smushed, but they like twist their boot while they're crushing it, kind of a thing, you know? And it's like, God, dog, can't you just like, can we have a little fun here? Can we like imagine for a minute? And they're just like, no, show me the figures, show me the evidence,
Yeah,
show me the
show me the
science.
data.
I want to see the proof. And it's like, yeah, but gosh darn it. It's just like such a conversation stopper. Is there
Yeah.
creativity in science in
Yeah,
your
I guess
experience?
what's interesting is before you can get to the data, you have to be creative.
Right.
Before you get to, oh, show me if this actually happens or not, you have to be imagining that it could be happening or wondering if it's happening. And um, that's where I feel like we can bring a lot of people and a lot of kids into science. There are probably a lot of teenagers that aren't great at math and think that they can't be a scientist, when actually the best scientists are broadly thinking about how things work
Hmm.
and are asking questions. And that's what all of us enjoy doing.
Right.
So you don't have to actually be great at calculus to be able to be a scientist in your life. So I think that's where it gets really creative.
When you're working with your colleagues at the arboretum, do you have like like sessions that are off the books where you're just like, hey, let's just like think far and wide, like what if? Does that
Yeah.
happen frequently? I would think it
Yeah.
would
So
have to,
we
otherwise it
actually
would
have
get so
like,
dry, like dull,
yeah,
right?
it'd be really boring. We have these kind of monthly, um, I don't know, meeting reading groups where one person will present what they're working on or talk about an idea, and we'll all just start to like riff off of each other. Like, oh, well, what about this? That would be cool. What about this, that, or the other thing? Have you thought about this? And like, just like all the juices get flowing.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody just starts to like get super excited about something. Something new might develop out of it, or it might not. It might just be like, that was really fun to think about that together,
Yeah.
because most people won't do this with me, but you all will do this with
Yeah,
me.
right. We can go there.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll stay in the Midwest? Do you have ambitions do you have ambitions of ever returning to the West Coast, or um and then I would also ask you, is there anything that you're just like really dying to study or try and answer, or like something that is like at the forefront of your like, before I finish, I want to understand this.
Hmm. I would like to go back to the West Coast. I love my job at the Arboretum, so I feel like there's not something I found where the grass is greener on the other side.
Yeah.
So I think it would take a lot to find a better organization to work at. My husband is from the East Coast, and so we're kind of like in between our families. But my brother and his kids now live in the Seattle area, and it seems like that could be a great place to end up in life someday. So
Not too bad. Seattle's not
that would be
bad.
pretty great.
Yeah.
I think getting back to the Bay Area is probably financially untenable at this point, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
I have nostalgia for the Bay Area of the '90s anyway, so
Totally.
it's not quite the same. Um, I don't know what I want to do with my life. but I get really excited right now about root exudates. I'm like
Okay.
super hot on root exudates right now. So I want to understand why trees produce root exudates, when they're producing root exudates, the chemical composition of those exudates, and then what impacts that has ultimately on how the soil functions. So,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, before I started talking, I was like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do next year, but that's probably like a 10 to 20 year project. So
Yeah.
maybe that is what I'll do with the rest of my science life is figure out what these things are actually doing and how much of them trees are actually making.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's this thing that gets thrown around like they're just producing exudates and like
Yeah.
and you know what it leads me, and this I was going to ask you this anyways, but you totally took me there. Is do you think, as I've talked with mycologists and people that have studied the soil food web and tree people and soil scientists and everything, like what comes first? Does the biology come first and then the tree? Does the tree come first and then the biology? Like literally does planting trees build the ecosystem around it? Because a mycologist or somebody who's dealing with fungi and bacteria might say they totally sculpt the system to be what they want it to be. And then a tree person will come around and be like, pah, without a tree, that stuff has no food source, purpose, and it's like,
Mhm.
where are you at?
Well, I guess if I think about primary succession with like a glacier retreating, the first thing that's going to come in are the microbes.
Mm,
So, in that sense, I feel like the microbes come before the plants
mm-hmm.
and become before the trees because a tree just could not physically grow on that rock that a glacier has recently passed over.
Where do the microbes come from?
Um,
Where does all this, where does it start? Like, how do they get there? What is it? What's happening?
hmm, I guess there's some that are like captured in the water of the glacier at some point.
Okay. All right.
Um, Microbes are in the air. I mean, they're just so
Okay.
ubiquitous
Yeah, fair.
that
And
like
you're
they
saying
explode in.
they're breaking down the surface of the rock. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying? And they're starting to
yeah,
create like available resource for,
yeah. And
okay.
then you get like a little bit of moss in there, and it all starts kind of breaking down. And once there's enough buildup of soil and biology, then maybe you can get some of those woody plants
Mm-hmm.
to start coming in.
Okay.
But they won't get there first.
Right, right. And where does fungi and bacteria fall in that like chain of order?
I think bacteria probably come first. I can't say for sure, but I feel like bacteria are much more mobile than fungi are.
Yeah.
So it seems like they would be there. And bacteria have a much more diverse suite of things they can eat.
Okay.
So, bacteria can be like fixing nitrogen,
Mm-hmm.
and getting energy from that. Whereas fungi might be a little more dependent on carbon that's already in the food web.
Okay. And when you started talking in the very beginning, you were talking about like disturbing the soil. Should we be disturbing the soil? Things of that nature. You said something that just sort of reminded me that I had talked with somebody at some point in the conversations had on this podcast about how the introduction of the iron till changed everything about the degradation of the soil system. And like prior to that, tilling was done with wood tills. And for whatever reason, magnetism, breaking of the surface, making the carbon layer available, and all of this stuff really kind of led at that moment. That was like a crux moment in the change of the soil system. Is there any truth to that?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Really,
I
what
mean,
what is true about that? I'm so curious. I'm so glad you said yes because so many people were like, "Oh, God, that's totally witch's brew, like voodoo magic talk." And I was like, "I don't know. Maybe there's like really something to this." Like I looked into it. What's it all about?
I feel like as soon as so the deeper that you're cutting into the soil, the more exposed all of those different layers are going to get. So I suspect that like a metal till will be more effective than a wooden one
Mm.
at breaking apart all of those different soil particles, at breaking apart all of the roots. And then like we get into, you know, the tractors of today, just like going along this spectrum of disturbance.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is answering your question.
Well, I think that's a really, you know what, that sounds like a really reasonable, as opposed to magnetism changing things. That sounds like a very reasonable assessment that it was maybe more productive in the destruction of the soil profile. But ultimately, if you were going to plant a tree, you talked about using compost and organic matter and enhancing the situation for certain trees in a rocky environment. Like if you just had an optimal, obviously species by species, case by case, but if we just talk about optimal circumstance to put a living plant into a soil system, would an undisturbed soil system be the ideal circumstance to place that plant into?
Yes. Yeah. I tell people, you know, a lot of gardeners, a lot of garden clubs are like passionate about soil. And they're like, what should I do to my soil? And I said, why do you need to do anything to your soil? You know, so I would tell people to start there. So for example, I wanted to plant some trees in my yard this year, and the soil in the backyard is pretty nice. It seems like it wasn't really messed up a lot when the house was built. So all I did was dig a big enough hole, you know, break apart the root ball, make sure it was kind of planted properly, but otherwise just filled it back in with the soil that came out of the hole and added some mulch to the top to make sure there was good water holding so that that tree wouldn't die out very quickly
Mm-hmm.
or dry out. Most of the time, if your soil looks good, just start there. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you can dig a hole and you can put your plant into it, that's probably where you should start. And then if it doesn't look very good, then that's when you should start to manipulate the soil.
Yeah.
So start with the assumption that it's all good instead of the assumption that like you're going to need to do a lot of work to make it good.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. Do you, are there environments where fungi that engage in mycorrhiza can't grow? Like here in the Pacific Northwest,
Hmm.
if I grow a ponderosa pine in a bonsai container in Colorado, low relative humidity, high amount of sun, native range, I'm gonna have mycorrhizal, white cottony mycorrhizal mass just like covering the entire root system in the container. If I bring that same ponderosa pine to the Pacific Northwest, within 2 to 3 years, that mycorrhizal colony will be gone. And I don't see that very frequently here unless I protect plants from like tremendous rain and give them a lot of bottom heat in the containers.
Hmm.
I don't get the same generation of mycorrhiza, but that ponderosa pine doesn't necessarily decline or like atrophy as a result of that. So like what's happening there?
Yeah, I think in that case, you're probably, you know, all of your work on balancing the nutrient inputs is taking the place of some of that mycorrhiza.
Oh, interesting.
You know, you are actively like creating the optimal environment for that tree. And so it doesn't really require a relationship with the mycorrhiza in order to get what it needs.
Uh-huh. So would this be a situation where the tree would say, "Yeah, I'll give you one carbon for 30 nitrogen," and then the mycorrhiza,
Yeah,
the fungi's like, I'll take this
I'm
show on the
out.
road." Yeah.
I'm good.
Have
Yeah,
you
exactly.
seen situations where the tree actually robs and becomes the antagonist to the fungi?
Definitely.
Really?
Yeah, it
Okay.
works both ways. I mean, that's kind of where I get a little hung up on um, the mycorrhizal highway stuff because I think of plants and mycorrhiza as being more of in like a capitalist relationship than
Mm,
in a communal relationship.
okay.
So I just conceptually think of them as being these exchange partners and a little more like ruthless and out for themselves instead of like, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could give that tree some carbon too? Maybe this mycorrhiza will like help it get there.
Yeah.
I suspect both things are happening,
Sure. Yeah.
because in all likelihood it's all of this. But I think that's how I start to think about plants and their microbes and these opportunistic exchange relationships that makes it more difficult to think about how they might be interacting in a communal way.
Right. Right. Interesting. Megan, I want to be respectful of your time because I literally could come up with questions for the rest of the day to ask you, but it's been such a pleasure to get to talk to you, and I am really appreciative of the work that you guys are doing at the Arboretum. Honestly, I would not have known about the Morton Arboretum if we hadn't talked, but it sounds like I'm always motivated by an institution trying to elevate the level for the good of the understanding of the broader public and like community that they're trying to foster and facilitate. And a lot of places that I work with, the bureaucracy is just so intense that it sort of undermines the good that could be created. But the fact that you're surrounded by so many scientists that are motivated to find solutions for the changing environment for the good of trees, which I think are the constant protagonist in the world in our life. It's really uplifting, and there's not a lot of uplifting conversations to be had about climate change at the moment.
Yeah,
So,
right.
so I appreciate what you guys are doing, and I appreciate you being willing to spend your time with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. I had a lot of fun. I also, I mean, you ask a scientist a question and she can talk to you forever. So I appreciate all the fun questions and yeah, getting to think about how all of this stuff works together.
Yeah, yeah, it's super fascinating. I could stay here forever. And in fact, I would live here if I could, just in the world of wondering. If somebody wanted to, like, what's the deal with coming to visit the Arboretum or being involved, contributing? Like, what could somebody do?
Yeah.
How do you guys exist? Is it a nonprofit? Do you get funding? Do people contribute? Like, how could we help?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit. People can visit every day of the year. So you can get tickets online, mortonarb.org, or you can just come to the gatehouse and buy tickets the day of. We have 1,700 acres for people to explore. So we have thousands of trees, natural areas, depending on what people like to do. There's a children's garden that's really fun. We have a light show, illumination going on right
Cool.
now. So we do all of these kind of um, activities where we're trying to get people excited about trees at whatever level that they're at.
Sure.
So maybe you don't know you're excited about trees, but you do love some lights. And
Right.
so maybe we can kind of get you in that way. We also have a big philanthropy program. So if people are just excited about our organization, they can donate to us directly. Um, but definitely we love having people come and visit because then it's not just supporting our mission, but hopefully involving people in
Yeah.
our mission.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. We'll put a link in the description for the podcast and encourage people to get out there because it sounds pretty rock and roll. We're working on a project in Chicago in the West Pullman neighborhood right now. It's like an urban reforestation project
Mhm.
that we've been doing some consulting on, but it's really fascinating because it's an underserved neighborhood, and there's this strip of land that they're trying to kind of like reforest in a slightly organized but relatively natural fashion to return it to the original sort of prairie oak um, plant community that it originally was. But we've done a lot of different studies. We've done some soil tests and some plant sap tests on the plants around there just to have like some backbone information. But they did like like a radiant heat test, and found that it was like the coolest location in like the surrounding, I want to say within like 50 miles of it or something. It was crazy. Like they had this infrared map during the hottest day of the summer, and it was the coolest location in the city. And like that above everything else was like, well, it's just a great place to be. Um,
Yeah,
so maybe if I'm out there working on the project, I'll come see you guys.
definitely. That would be fantastic.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, good luck to you. I'll let you get back to it. But again, thanks for the time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good luck with the storms. Hopefully you weather them.
I might be paddling home, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks,
Great.
Megan. Happy holidays to you.
Bye.
Bye.